Hello, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Vital Dissent. I'm your host, as always, Patrick McFarlane. Joining us again today, returning to the show, is Kelley Vlahos. Kelley, welcome back to the show. You're a senior advisor at the Quincy Institute and editorial director at Responsible Statecraft there. And you're also formerly of the American Conservative. So do you just want to remind folks, who you are and what you do and what your focuses are?
Sure, absolutely. And great to be here, Patrick. I'm the editor of Responsible Statecraft, which is the foreign policy magazine of the Quincy Institute. And we are focused in giving a platform to independent, alternative voices, outside contributors, internal reporters, and analysts who are geared towards providing space and interest in restraint, anti-interventionism, realism, and just looking at U.S. foreign policy from a non-blobby, non-establishment perspective, and in hopes of recalibrating how Washington does foreign policy here and abroad. And we've been very busy over the last 3.5 years because there are a lot of people out there who want that alternative and can't get it anywhere else in the mainstream media. So very proud of what we do on a daily basis.
Yeah, in our first interview, I think we really hit it off pretty well. We kind of discussed the differences kind of in our different approaches a little bit, but there's a lot of common ground that I think that we can, obviously the topic that we're going to discuss today is the Lavender program and Peter Thiel. And maybe if we have a little bit of time, you wrote an article recently about U.S. General wants Marshall Plan to counter China and Latin America. So I think that's really interesting, but I didn't read it in advance. But so you did put out this article though the other day, Peter Thiel, I defer to Israel, and he's doing some kind of at Cambridge, some kind of an event where he gets asked a question from the audience about the Lavender program, and he really has a hard time answering. And I don't want to put you on the spot to speculate, but I saw some other footage from that interview, and he was either very nervous or I thought he looked like he was on uppers maybe, and that's just speculating. But do you want to kind of describe the just the 10,000 foot view of this art piece?
Sure, I was pretty taken aback by his inability to answer that question clearly. And the question was from a woman in the audience who asked him point blank how he felt about Israel using AI technology in its war in Gaza, clearly referring, without naming it, the Lavender program that had been reported by 972 magazine in a unbelievably exhaustive report, an investigative report on this AI technology, this program that had been using AI to put 37,000 or more Gazans on a list in which they gave them a rating from 1 to 100 based on how likely they would be to be advancing or being representing Hamas interests. So are they a militant? And each of these Gazans would have a rating. And part of the program was stalking these people, surveillance, and then when those who are deemed Hamas militants with this high rating, when they were in their homes with their families, the Israeli military would strike with missiles and rockets and drones. And a lot of civilians were killed because, hey, they're with their families in their home, and many with extended families. And these were IDF sources who had gone to 972 magazine and described this program in unbelievable detail. And so we know now that scores, maybe even thousands of innocent Palestinians had been killed because they were targeted using this AI technology that had been deemed to have 10%, false positive rate. And so that the likelihood that 10% of the people on this list were not militants at all and just had been caught up in this web. going back to Peter Thiel. So this woman in the audience was clearly asking about this because Peter Thiel was a co-founder of Palantir, which provides massive data streams to AI platforms for surveillance and targeting, just like the one I just described in Israel. They're doing this right now in Ukraine. And they've boasted about it. They've boasted the fact that they've been testing out all of these platforms in Ukraine and are responsible. Their platforms are responsible for most of the targeting in Ukraine right now. And this has been confirmed by Palantir CEO Alex Karp. Now, do we know that Palantir is supplying streams and the technology for the Lavender program? We don't know for sure, but we know that they have contracts with Israel to advance, quote unquote, their war effort. We know that because they told us back in January. So we're looking at Peter Thiel here, very uncomfortable. He's speaking to the Cambridge Union. He gets asked about AI technology killing civilians on the battlefield, and he doesn't know how to respond. Why? Because we know that Israel is a client of Peter Thiel's Palantir. We know that Peter Thiel and his co-worker or colleague, Alex Karp, have boasted about they're assisting Israel in their war effort. Not only have they boasted in assisting, but they have basically said that Israel is in the right in what it's doing in Gaza. And he even said this as he stumbled and he bumbled and stuttered in trying to answer this question. He said not only does he defer to Israel on these questions, but also that the IDF is in the right. That's an exact quote. So I felt the need to write about this, not just because of the optics that, you have somebody who clearly feels uncomfortable, doesn't know how to answer a straightforward question about how his technology that he's been promoting for close to like 20 years when it comes to like the surveillance and the targeting and the data streams elements, doesn't know how to even speak for them when they're actually being used in this way. But also this idea that this guy who has been lumped in with the America First foreign policy crowd at times is saying that he defers to another country. He defers to Israel. And so I felt the need to write about this because it really does reflect this creepy reality that we have now, in which American defense contractors, major ones like Palantir, which have numerous contracts with the U.S. government, the U.S. military, and spy agencies, are deferring to other countries because their business goes across boundaries and into other countries, and now they're actually promoting other countries' war effort. There is no fealty to their own country on one hand, and there's a big fealty to on the other. And so I think this should be a major concern for anyone who is trying to promote some sort of policy of peace or restraint or realism back here in our own country.
And there was really no argument that was presented by Peter Thiel either. I mean, I know he's being called out on the spot, and it's not
Yeah.
necessarily the best forum to be having a debate about, how ethical Israel's actions are or if they're committing war crimes. Neither does he probably want to get into that discussion at all, but there is no argument. He just says, I defer to Israel.
Correct. He defers to Israel, and I agree with you. He looked so uncomfortable, and he did stutter a lot in some of the other questions that he was given. But on this issue, I think if he was pressed more, he might have said some other things that would make us flinch. Like I said, he and especially his colleague Alex Karp, who is the CEO of Palantir, have been very vocally in support of Israel. I had noted in another piece that I wrote for Responsible Statecraft earlier in the summer that Karp had joined former chairman of our Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, on a stage for another defense boondoggle conference, basically talking about how Israel has done its best to protect civilian casualties, B, that The United States has done the same thing before in terms of mass collateral damage and death and war, but also saying things like we, meaning Palantir and the defense contractors, are the peace agents because they're building weapons that are going to kill the bad guys and hasten the end of the wars, and basically lashing out at the protesters and on college campuses. So they've been quite ideological, along with very predictable in terms of like protecting their business interests. But it's this ideological standpoint blending with their business interests that I think that I know concerns me, because when it comes to Israel, like it's like you have to be all in, and you not only have to protect your client and their interests and the contractual agreements that you have, but it seems as though when it comes to Israel, you have to like basically agree with their policies, the ideology, and promote their point of view in other country in their country and from their perspective. And I just don't find this very like pro-American.
Yeah. And in my mind, I'm just kind of comparing and contrasting too, because it's, of course, this isn't the first time that we've seen these venture capitalists get involved with this type of technology or being involved in current conflicts around the world. I mean, the first thing that really comes to my mind is Elon Musk's involvement. And again, there's that PayPal connection there, but his involvement with the Starlink and the targeting in Ukraine. But it seems like, he's still providing them, but at some point, at least, he vocally, and I don't want to defend him too much, but he vocally questions what's going on. And at some point, I think he was being lambasted, at least in the media, for saying, well, maybe we don't want to provide these Starlink sites for targeting. I don't know
Right.
how much you recall that.
Yeah, I do. I do. And then you see, of course, you see the exact opposite occurring here with Palantir, in which their CEO said let's see, I'm just going to find the exact date here. So he said earlier this spring, or like around March, basically saying that we are extremely proud to be supporting Israel in its war effort, exceedingly proud, that after October 7th, within weeks, we are on the ground and we are involved in operationally crucial operations in Israel. Well, what does that mean? I mean, so if their product is providing surveillance and targeting information to clients, it's hard for me to believe that they aren't supplying all of the data, intelligence data, that Israel needs for this AI generated program, Lavender, and for this super covert surveillance agency, Project 8200, which people have been speaking about. Now, like I said, we don't have their fingerprints on Lavender, so I don't want to like get ahead of myself and say that they are, but all of the indications just from hearing the statements from the company itself is that they were providing tools before and after October 7th to Israel, and they upgraded those tools as recently as January, and are pretty damn proud of it. And they can say, well, these are the bad guys, the Hamas are the bad guys, Israel are the good guys. But the reality is that nearly 40,000 Palestinians are dead, and we know, even by Israel's metrics, that most of them are civilians. So the targeting that they are supplying, or we believe that they're supplying to Israel, resulting in the deaths of civilians, women and children. And we know the stories that we've seen and we've heard them about the maiming of children, the amputations, the orphaning of children. This is not just about good guys and bad guys on the battlefield, which you see more of that in Ukraine, where there is an actual front and people are fighting. Yes, civilians are dying, but it's not like the fish in the barrel killing that we're seeing in Gaza right now on this closed strip. in which almost 40,000 people have been killed out of a population of 2 million. So there's a lot of ethical and moral questions here that I don't think are really being asked by the mainstream media because they're too afraid to question Israel's policies writ large. And so like a lot of this stuff just falls under the radar or is being chalked up as patriotic among certain circles. And that's one thing that we also need to note, that these venture capitalists like Palantir, Peter Thiel, Karp, and others are calling themselves patriotic for what they're doing. And I don't understand that, because that gives the impression that they are working on behalf of U.S. interests. And I have seen no evidence that what they are doing are at all advancing American interests. I see what they're doing is advancing Israel's interests, but I have not seen good arguments. I've seen actually arguments against what they're doing as being not in our interest. So I would like that for us, whoever's listening here on your program, to call these people out when they call themselves patriots.
And I know this is mostly rhetorical, but if you get into the name Palantir itself, like I don't know how familiar you are with Lord of the Rings if you're a fellow nerd like myself. Like
Mm.
they it's such a questionable choice for a piece of technology, especially one, from a company that's labeling, wrapping themselves in the flag ostensibly and calling themselves patriotic, because in Lord of the Rings, the Palantir were a bunch of seeing stones. Like, so I mean, the surveillance is, I guess, a part of that, but these were crystal balls essentially inside Lord of the Rings that were used by Sauron, like the evil god, the evil magician figure, to corrupt men and to bend them to his evil ends and will. And I don't know if I've also read that Palantir itself and some of these different businesses, they take the Lord of the Rings analogies further, and like they name some of their offices the Shire, like as in Lord of the Rings. And you question
Tolkien is spinning in his
why.
grave.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, this is the Eye of Sauron. I mean, if somebody should sketch this out, and it would be the saddest, most depressing sketch you've ever seen. But it's like the Eye of Sauron is over Gaza, and that is the Lavender program. I mean, you imagine 37,000 people out of a population of 2 million were on this list as potential militants. And these IDF soldiers who spoke with 972 magazine basically said that there was little human interaction in this program. And this was all happening in the first weeks of the conflict. So I think that, I'd have to like really check with these reporters, but it sounds like a lot of this had been tamped down because it got so out of control. But we're talking about the first several weeks of the conflict, when most of these civilians, when the real high fatality rates were happening. And there was little human input into the strikes. I mean, this is where you say black is white and white is black. When Netanyahu gets on the stage to talk to U.S. Congress and he says the Israeli military is the most protective of civilians than any other military in history. And then you have IDF soldiers telling reporters that they literally let AI target with little human input Palestinian civilians and kill them in their homes because that was the most convenient way to get them. And that's a quote. That's just not me interpreting. They said that getting them in the homes was optimal because you had a target and they were there and you knew they were there because they had all sorts of surveillance watching. So they'd assign these ratings and then follow these guys until they went in their home. They're blasting away at entire families. And the Americans, which, Mark Milley's throwing under the bus, David Petraeus is throwing under the bus, Ted Cruz is throwing under the bus, basically saying, oh, well, the Americans have done this. No, the Americans don't do that. And I am the first to criticize the U.S. military when it kills civilians and it doesn't protect civilians in wartime. But show me any targeting software that the U.S. is using where they literally were hands off and letting the AI do it itself. I'm sorry. I mean, even in the case of Yemen with the Houthis, we've been bombing the Houthis sporadically for the last several months in retaliation for them attacking shipping in the Red Sea. We started bombing their assets and infrastructure in Yemen. We have been literally only targeting military targets there that I know of. Now, I could be wrong. Now, the Houthis hit Israel and killed 2 people a couple weeks ago and in Tel Aviv. And what did the Israelis do? They immediately went after civilian infrastructure. They immediately went after the ports where no food's going to get in. And reports said, U.S. has been doing this all summer, but they have been careful to avoid the ports because that hurts civilians. That, it doesn't hurt the Houthis because they get emboldened, because they get stronger when they get attacked. But people have been starving there for years, and the first thing Israel does is go after civilian infrastructure. I mean, this is not, this is the opposite of what Netanyahu was boasting about when he spoke to the U.S. Congress. And to say that, oh, well, the U.S. does it too is bullshit.
Yeah.
I mean, we do a lot of bad things, but I'm not going to sit here and let Netanyahu say that they are better than U.S. military when it comes to protecting civilians after what we have witnessed over the last 8 months.
Do you think that the fear with the United States is that if we do start attacking too much civilian infrastructure in Yemen, that it's going to, light sympathy across, the Muslim world and get, more countries involved? And as a second part question to that, I believe it was, Turkey, Erdogan made a statement saying that, well, enough is enough. We need to get involved. And I don't know, it's probably just bluster from Erdogan. But at what point does the Muslim world get involved? I know, like, we've been waiting, not waiting, hoping for it to happen, hoping it doesn't happen because of the conflagration it would cause. But have you identified any kind of signs that the time might be getting closer, that it would even happen at all?
I don't know, Patrick. I mean, the Houthis have been the sole representative or the sole active defender of Palestinians in Gaza from the get-go. They have actually put their money where their mouths are and have been attacking U.S., Israeli, international shipping relentlessly since October. And nothing that the United States is doing or its coalition members have been doing in the Red Sea has abated that. But these other countries have been a lot of talk and no action. And I know there are myriad reasons for that. One, you have countries like the UAE and other Arab countries that were starting, Bahrain, starting to develop normalization. UAE actually signed normalization agreement with Israel. They're very protective right now about keeping the trade and the travel and the other diplomatic ties open with Israel, and they've been cracking down on their own people. Same with Saudi Arabia, cracking down. Egypt, cracking down on its own people who want to protest in favor of Palestinians. So you have this weird disconnect between the autocratic monarchies in the Arab world who don't necessarily, I mean, they're not outwardly in support of Israel, but they don't want to rock the boat. And so that they're turning around and throwing protesters in jail and cracking down on them because they don't want, they just don't want the optics. And so they're not going to do anything. They're not going to throw in for the Palestinians and defend them. You have Iran, which has been very careful, no matter what anybody says about them being crazy, maniacal, ready to fight, they have actually kept their proxies in check, except for the Houthis. Hezbollah has this low-grade war going on with Israel that's probably going to blow at any minute because of these attacks in the Golan Heights over the weekend. But they've actually kept a lid on letting that get out of control. We have seen some of the Iranian proxies continue to attack U.S. assets in Iran and Syria. That could also blow, because there were attacks on Thursday and Friday that nobody was reporting about. I just found out about them on Sunday night. So things are definitely simmering under the surface. But as to your original question, I just don't see the Muslim world, other than what Erdogan has said, like you mentioned. There's a lot of rhetorical support for the Palestinians, but not a lot of action. So I could be eating my hat tomorrow. Everything can blow up. But I think the Muslim world, the Arab world, has been very careful as to not move into a kinetic stage. It has not moved beyond rhetoric when it comes to Israel, and for many reasons.
I had and I'll this is probably, we're running up on time, so this is probably my last question for you here. But let's play our I don't know, Fantasyland hats maybe, and say, well, if Erdogan did take action against Israel, since Turkey is a NATO member, and I think it's been kind of like the redheaded stepchild of NATO for a little bit, but what would the broader effect be? And this is speculation, but the broader effect what would it be in NATO? I mean, would it be something that finally, because I'm kind of the opinion that NATO is not as closely tied as maybe some would want us to believe, and I think that maybe it is just a facade that if called to do, if a kinetic war kicked off with Russia, between NATO and Russia, I think that the alliance would fall apart, because you'd have a bunch of people not wanting to answer the muster and actually get involved if we're not all dead by nuclear war. So just kind of your thoughts on that.
About Turkey, if it had decided to get involved in Israel and the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah.
Yeah, and what the effect would be on NATO, maybe.
I think there'd be a huge backlash from Washington, obviously, and UK and France and Germany, which are the major NATO members. Germany is foursquare in support of Israel. They've been cracking down on their own protesters. In France, they've been cracking down on protesters at the Olympics. It's no joke. I think that they have abided or just let Turkey do its thing in terms of being a little bit of a hedge between Russia and Ukraine, and serving as sort of that red-headed stepchild role. But I think when it comes to Israel, there's heightened sensitivities there. But I don't know what form that would take, since we're talking about a transatlantic alliance, and Ukraine is absolutely within that sort of sphere of influence. I don't know what it means when there are skirmishes in the Middle East that in which Turkey and the U.S. and Turkey and the West diverge. I mean, Turkey has been attacking the Kurdish independence movement in Syria, and we are allies, but partners with those Kurds in Syria. And so there have been times where our interests have clashed with Turkey, and they're still clashing. I mean, that's a whole other area. So, I mean, things could really blow up, because if Turkey gets involved, Israel is already bombing Syria. That might step up there as well. And that would drag Assad in. It would drag a lot of fighters who have all sorts of interests and sides. Iran, I mean, that seems to be the wild card. At what point does Iran feel like that it has to lean in harder activate more of its proxies, whether they be in Syria or Lebanon or Iraq, So the Houthis, I think that there are a lot of question marks, and honestly, I think this is why the United States has been talking to a lot of these actors. There's different channels, back channels, because they don't want to blow this up, and they even told Israel, "Yeah, we helped you retaliate or defend you when Iran was retaliating for the consulate bombing in Damascus, but we are not going to give the same level of help if you start a war in Lebanon um, with Hezbollah." And so we've kind of sent the signals that we don't want this to blow up into a greater conflict. I don't think we can, I personally don't think that the United States can handle it militarily because it has really spread itself thin in Eastern Europe. And and we have this election going on. I don't think they can handle it. But I don't have a ton of confidence in the Biden administration to really take charge, because they could have put the kibosh on a lot of this by using its leverage over Israel months ago. And so it seems to be always in reactive mode, unfortunately.
Yeah. And of course there's the whole pivot to Asia and that whole confronting Asia as well, or China as well. But okay, well, where should people check out your work in the future?
Sure. I mean, I'd love for people to go to responsiblestatecraft.org. You're going to find excellent analysis on this issue, but also on Ukraine, especially a lot of independent reporting analysis on Ukraine, and other parts of the world too, including Africa and the U.S. the failed U.S. policies there, Latin America, the broader Middle East. So yeah, and Washington politics as well. I mean, there's obviously so much going on there that relates or interacts with foreign policy and national security. So I would love for people to come by if you haven't read Responsible Statecraft
Yeah,
before.
and thanks so much for your time. I know we're gonna have plenty to talk about in the next, I don't know, 5 months here as the election comes through. But
Yeah.
anyways, all right. Well, keep up the great work, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you, Patrick.
All right, thanks so much.